Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to week 8 of distance learning. Today we're going to read 2 more chapters of Sign of the Beaver. So we're reading chapter 17 and 18 today. Chapter 17. When Matt woke, the wigwam was dim, but the cracks of brightness around the door flap showed that it was daylight. By the sounds, the village was up and about. He could hear men's voices, the shouts of children, and the shrill yelping of dogs. Behind these sounds there beat a dull thumping rhythm. Could the Indians still be dancing? He lay looking about him, at the smoke-streaked walls of woven matting, at the clutter of objects hanging here and there, shapeless garments, cooking pots, odd-shaped bags of animal skin, bundles of dried grasses and herbs. Under the platform where he had slept was an untidy pile of baskets and rolled-up mats. From the heap of ashes in the center of the dirt floor, a wisp of smoke curled upwards toward the small hole in the roof. Much of it could not escape and drifted back to hang in thin clouds just above his head. Matt's throat felt tight with it, and he sat up, coughing. Then he moved to the doorway, pushed back the flap, and stepped outside. As though they had been waiting, children came scuffing about him, their bright eyes curious. Most of them were naked as little frogs. "Quay," he said uncertainly, sending them into a chorus of giggles. Matt was relieved to see Etienne approaching. "You sleep long time," Etienne greeted him. "Too much bear, reckon." Matt smiled shamefacedly. He still found it hard to take Etienne's sober teasing. Over the heads of the children he looked about the village. Last night in the darkness and firelight it had appeared mysterious and awesome. Now, under the strong sunlight, he saw that it was shabby and cluttered. There were a few bark cabins. For the most part, the wigwams were ramshackle and flimsy. On every side, from racks of untrimmed branches, hung rows of drying fish. Scattered heaps of clamshells and animal bones littered the ground. The Indians themselves had discarded the splendor of the night before. Some of them, like Etienne, wore only a breechcloth, others faded cloth trousers and ragged blankets. The women had replaced their bright finery with skirts and vests of dingy blue cotton. Now he could see what was making that rhythmic thumping. 2 women were pounding corn in a huge mortar made from a tree trunk, their arms alternately rising and falling. Others nearby were grinding in smaller mortars of hollowed stones. They sat close together, jabbering like blue jays, but their chatter did not for an instant interfere with the steady rhythm of their bare arms. In front of another wigwam, 2 women were weaving baskets of rushes. As Matt and Etienne passed them, they looked up with shy smiles. All the women, Matt noticed, were hard at work. A few very old men sat smoking in front of the wigwams, and a group of boys squatted in a circle playing at some sort of game. "Where are the men?" he asked. "Gone," Etienne said. "Before sunup. My grandfather lead hunt for deer." He had brought a hunk of cornbread for each of them, and munching it they walked through the village back to the canoe. Matt kept hanging back, looking all about him at the village. He wanted to stay longer. There were 100 questions he longed to ask, but Etienne seemed impatient. His genial mood of the night before had vanished. Without wasting a motion, he pushed the canoe into the water. A taggle of children had followed them and now stood on the bank, laughing and waving as they moved out into the river. Matt tried to find a reason for Etienne's silence. "If it hadn't been for me," he asked, "would you have gone on the deer hunt with the men?" Etienne did not like the question. "Not take me," he said. "I have no gun." "You're a good shot with a bow and arrow." Etienne scowled. "That old way," he said. "Good for children. Indian hunt now with white man's gun. Someday my grandfather buy me gun. Need many beaver skins. Beaver not so many now." "I know guns cost a lot," Matt said. "I'll have to wait a good while for another one by myself." Etienne had long since heard the story of Ben's visit. "White man can buy with money," Etienne said. "Indian not have money. One time plenty wampum. Now wampum no good to pay for gun." There was bitterness in Etienne's voice. Matt understood now why Etienne had defended the beaver dam so fiercely. Was it true that beaver were getting scarce? Matt thought of the village they had just left, how very poor it seemed, how few possessions the Indians could boast. For the first time, Matt glimpsed how it might be for them, watching their old hunting grounds taken over by white settlers and by white traders demanding more skins than the woods could provide. As they set off through the forest, he tried to think of a way to lift Etienne's gloom. "That was a mighty fine feast," he said, "and I was glad to see where you live. I'd like to go there again some day." Etienne's scowl only deepened. My grandmother not want you come to feast, he said finally. My grandfather say you must. She say you not sleep in her house. Oh, said Matt lamely, his own pleasure suddenly dimmed. So many things were suddenly clear to him. Why he had been left alone to sleep in the empty wigwam. Why Etienne had hurried him away so abruptly this morning. Etienne had been caught in a family argument and was annoyed about it. My grandfather hate all white men, Etienne said. When Matt could find nothing to answer, Etienne went on. White man kill my mother. She go out with 2 squaw to find bark for make basket. White man come through woods and shoot with gun. My mother do them no harm. We no longer at war with white men. Just same they kill for get scalp. White man get money for Indian scalp, even scalp of children. Matt's indignant protest never got past his throat. He remembered that it was true, or had been a long time ago. He had heard that during the war the Massachusetts governor had offered a bounty for Indian scalps. Etienne must have been a very small child. My father go out on war trail, Etienne said. He go to find white man who killed my mother. He not come back. Matt was speechless. He had never dreamed that anything like this lay behind Etienne's carefree life. He had never wondered about Etienne's parents at all, only accepted without question that the boy followed his grandfather and obeyed him. No wonder she hates us, he said at last. Terrible things always happen when there's a war, on both sides. You've got to admit, Etienne, that there was a reason. The Indians did the same thing to white settlers. The white women were afraid to go outside their cabins. Why white men make cabins on Indian hunting grounds? Matt had no answer to that. It was no use, he thought. The war with the French was over. The Indians and the English had made peace, but the hatred, would that ever be over? For all he and Etienne walked through the woods together, there was a wall between them that Etienne would never forget. In sudden panic, he thought of his own mother. Was it right for his father to bring her to this place? Does your grandfather hate us too? He asked. Etienne did not answer at first. Finally he said, My grandfather say Indian must learn to live with white man. It was not the answer Matt had hoped for, but Saknis had said he must come to the feast. In spite of the grandmother, Saknis had made him welcome. When my father comes, he said, I want him to know your grandfather. I think they would like each other. Etienne did not answer, and they walked on in silence. Discomforted, Matt turned his attention to the trail they were following. Presently he recognized the unmistakable carving of a little animal cut into the bark of a tree. But when he turned to Etienne to boast of his recognition, he was silenced by the darkness in Etienne's eyes. Instead, without speaking, he studied the signs they passed. He marked fallen trees pointing along the path, small piles of stones, and, wherever the trail seemed to vanish, he discovered on a tree the sign of the Beaver. When they came out at last on a trail he knew well, he marked carefully the spot where the 2 trails met. Why, he thought in a sudden excitement, I could actually find my way to that village. I'm sure I could. But he did not share this thought with Etienne. He knew that unless Etienne took him there, he could never go to that village again. Saknis had only invited him to the feast out of kindness, or perhaps out of fairness for his small share in killing the bear. Would he ever be given another chance?